Life in the small suburban town of Brooksville was supposed to be perfect. For the past 15 years, I believed I had it all: a loving wife, a stable job, and a serene home. My name is Jake, and I'm a logistics manager, content with the steady rhythm of my life. My wife, Linda, stayed at home after we got married, and we built our lives around a simple, predictable routine. Our two-story house, nestled at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, was our sanctuary. Linda, always tech-savvy and efficient, handled the home front while I ensured our financial stability. Our lives were interwoven with shared memories and daily rituals that had become second nature. Our town was small enough that everyone knew each other, but large enough to offer the conveniences of modern life. Weekends were often spent in our well-maintained garden, or hosting barbecues with friends and neighbors. The local community center was the hub of social activity, where Linda volunteered frequently, and I joined in occasionally. We didn't have kids, which allowed us the freedom to indulge in hobbies and spontaneous weekend getaways. To an outsider, our life seemed idyllic. And for a long time, I believed it was. But as I would soon discover, appearances can be deceiving, and the facade of our perfect life was about to crumble, revealing secrets that would shatter my world. The first cracks in our seemingly perfect life appeared subtly. Linda's behavior started changing in ways that were easy to dismiss at first. She had always been outgoing and friendly, but lately her laughter seemed forced, and her smiles didn't reach her eyes. She began to spend more time on her phone, often texting late into the night. When I asked her who she was talking to, she would brush it off, saying it was just friends from her volunteer group or distant relatives. Her trips out of the house became more frequent. She claimed she was running errands, meeting up with old friends, or attending community meetings. At first, I didn't think much of it. But then I noticed she started dressing up more than usual for these outings, wearing makeup and clothes that she would normally reserve for special occasions. She even started wearing perfume, something she hadn't done regularly in years. I tried to rationalize my unease. Maybe she was just trying to feel better about herself. After all, who was I to question her need for some personal time? But then there were the late-night phone calls. I'd hear her whispering in the kitchen, her voice too low to make out the words, but her tone filled with an urgency that didn't fit the context of casual conversations. One night, as I was cleaning up after dinner, Linda received a text message. Her phone was on the counter, and out of the corner of my eye I saw the name Chris, followed by a heart emoji. My stomach churned. Chris was an old school friend of Linda's, someone she occasionally mentioned but never in a significant way. Why was he texting her now, and why the heart? Trying to shake off the gnawing suspicion, I decided to ask her directly. "Hey, who's Chris? I saw a message from him pop up on your phone." Linda's reaction was immediate and defensive. She snatched her phone off the counter and gave me a strained smile. "Oh, it's just Chris from high school. We've been catching up. He's going through a rough patch and I'm just being a supportive friend." Her explanation seemed plausible, but her defensive posture and the way she clutched her phone made my doubts grow. I didn't push further that night, but a seed of suspicion had been planted, and it started to grow. Over the next few weeks, Linda's absences became more frequent, and her excuses less believable. She would come home late, claiming that meetings ran over, or that she got caught up with friends. When I suggested we spend more time together, she would agree enthusiastically, but then cancel plans at the last minute, citing some urgent commitment or sudden headache. One Saturday afternoon, I decided to follow her. She said she was going to a community center meeting, but instead, I watched as she drove to a small cafe on the other side of town. Parking a few cars down, I saw her meet up with Chris. They hugged, a little too long for just friends, and sat down at a corner table, their heads close together as they talked. The sight of them together felt like a punch to the gut. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, trying to process the reality that was unfolding before my eyes. Linda was lying to me, and whatever was going on between her and Chris, it wasn't innocent. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing with possibilities, and my heart heavy with the growing certainty of betrayal. I needed to know the truth, but confronting her without concrete evidence seemed futile. Linda was clever, and I knew she would have explanations ready. I needed proof, something undeniable that would force her to confront the reality of her actions. That night, as I lay awake next to Linda, listening to her steady breathing, I made a decision. I would find out the truth, no matter what it took. The woman I had loved and trusted for 15 years was hiding something, and I was determined to uncover her secrets. The day of reckoning came sooner than I anticipated. After weeks of living in a haze of doubt and suspicion, I decided to take a more direct approach. I needed irrefutable evidence to confront Linda, to force her to face the reality she was trying so hard to hide. It was a Friday night, and Linda had left for one of her community meetings again. She had spent extra time getting ready, and as she walked out the door, I felt a familiar knot tighten in my stomach. Once she was gone, I went to her laptop, which she often left logged in on the kitchen counter. My hands trembled as I opened her email, my mind racing with guilt and anxiety. At first, there was nothing out of the ordinary, messages from friends, family, and community members. But then I saw an email from Chris. The subject line read, "Tonight." My heart pounded in my chest as I clicked on it. The email was short but intimate, detailing their plans to meet at a small hotel outside of town. Chris mentioned how much he missed her and couldn't wait to hold her in his arms again. Nausea washed over me. There it was, in black and white, the confirmation of my worst fears. Linda was cheating on me, and it wasn't just an emotional affair. It was physical. The betrayal cut deep, and I felt a mixture of rage and heartbreak. I needed more proof. I grabbed my phone and texted my friend Paul, who worked in tech and owed me a few favors. I explained the situation, and within minutes, he sent me a link to a tracking app. I installed it on Linda's phone, which she had carelessly left charging in the kitchen. The app would allow me to see her location in real time. I felt a pang of guilt for invading her privacy, but my need for the truth overrode my conscience. That night, I watched as the tracking app showed Linda's location at the hotel. I knew I had to confront her, but I wanted to catch her in the act. I needed her to see the pain she was causing, to witness the destruction of our marriage firsthand. So I got in my car and drove to the hotel. I parked a short distance away and waited. After about an hour, I saw them. Linda and Chris emerged from the hotel, laughing and holding hands. They kissed before getting into their respective cars. The sight of them together, so casual and intimate, made my blood boil. I followed Linda home, my mind a whirlwind of emotions and thoughts. When we arrived back at the house, Linda acted as if nothing was amiss. She kissed me on the cheek and asked about my day, her eyes twinkling with a happiness that now seemed cruelly deceptive. I couldn't take it any longer. I had to confront her. "Linda, we need to talk," I said, my voice shaking with barely controlled anger. She looked at me, surprised by my tone. "What's wrong, Jake?" "I know where you were tonight," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I know about you and Chris." Her face went pale, and she took a step back. "What are you talking about?" "Don't lie to me, Linda!" I snapped, pulling out my phone and showing her the emails and the tracking app. "I followed you to the hotel. I saw you with him." For a moment, Linda just stared at me, her eyes wide with shock. Then, as if a switch had flipped, she became defensive. "You had no right to invade my privacy like that. How dare you follow me?" "How dare I?" I repeated, incredulous. "You've been lying to me, cheating on me, and you have the audacity to talk about privacy?" Her eyes flashed with anger. "It's not what you think, Jake. Chris and I are just friends." "Friends?" I echoed, my voice rising. "Do friends meet at hotels and send each other love notes?" She didn't answer, her silence confirming everything. I felt a wave of despair wash over me. "Why, Linda? Why did you do this?" She looked down, her anger fading into something that almost resembled regret. I don't know, Jake. I was lonely. You were always so busy with work, and Chris was there for me." "That's your excuse?" I asked, my voice breaking. "I was working to provide for us, for our future. And you repay me by betraying our marriage." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I couldn't find any sympathy for her. The hurt was too raw, too deep. "I'm sorry, Jake. I never meant to hurt you." "It's too late for apologies," I said, my voice cold. "I'm filing for divorce." She looked at me, her eyes wide with fear. "No, please, Jake, don't do this. We can work it out." I shook my head, feeling a strange sense of finality. "No, Linda, you made your choice. Now I'm making mine." I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there, her tears falling silently. The marriage I had once cherished was over, shattered by betrayal and lies. And as I lay in the guest room that night, I felt a mix of relief and sorrow. I had uncovered the truth, but at the cost of everything I had believed in. The morning after the confrontation, I awoke feeling hollow. The reality of my decision weighed heavily on me, but there was no turning back. The truth was out, and there was no way to undo the damage that had been done. As I made my way to the kitchen, I found Linda already there, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee. She looked up as I entered, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "We need to talk," she said quietly, her voice devoid of the usual sharpness. I nodded and sat down across from her, bracing myself for the conversation that was about to unfold. "Jake, please," she began, her voice trembling. "I know I've made mistakes, but I love you. I never wanted to hurt you." "Love?" I scoffed, unable to hide the bitterness in my voice. "Is that what you call meeting another man at a hotel? Sending him messages behind my back? I know it sounds bad," she pleaded, "but it was never about replacing you. It was just, I was lonely. Chris made me feel wanted. And I didn't?" I shot back, my anger bubbling to the surface. "I was here, Linda. I was here every day, working to provide for us, to build a future. And you threw it all away for some cheap thrill." Tears streamed down her face, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sympathy. "I don't know why I did it," she sobbed. "I was confused, lost. Please, Jake, we can go to counseling. We can fix this." I shook my head, my resolve firm. "There's nothing to fix, Linda. You broke us. You betrayed my trust, and I can't live like this." She reached across the table, grabbing my hand, her touch cold and desperate. "Jake, please give me another chance. I'll do anything." I pulled my hand away, unable to look at her. "It's too late for that. I've already contacted a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce." Her face crumpled, and she let out a choked sob. "Please, Jake, think about us, about everything we've built together." "I have," I said, my voice steady, "and I can't see any way forward. This marriage is over." Linda's desperation turned to anger. "Fine," she spat, wiping away her tears. "If that's what you want, then go ahead. But don't think for a second that I'm going to make this easy for you." I stood up, feeling a sense of finality. "It doesn't have to be like this, Linda. We can part ways amicably." She laughed bitterly. "Amicably? After everything? You're delusional." I walked out of the kitchen, feeling a mix of sadness and determination. This was the end, and there was no going back. I spent the rest of the day contacting my lawyer, gathering documents, and making preparations for the inevitable battle ahead. That evening, Linda's behavior became erratic. She alternated between begging for forgiveness and lashing out at me with venomous words. At one point, she accused me of being the reason for her affair, claiming that my work and absence had driven her into Chris' arms. I couldn't believe the audacity of her accusations. It was as if she couldn't accept any responsibility for her actions. The next day, I found myself standing outside my lawyer's office, a sense of dread settling in my stomach. The confrontation with Linda had left me emotionally drained, but I knew I had to push forward. Inside, my lawyer, Mr. Davis, was waiting for me. "Good to see you, Jake," he said, offering a firm handshake. "I understand this is a difficult time, but we're going to get through this." I nodded, grateful for his support. "Thank you, Mr. Davis. I just want to make sure everything is done right, especially regarding the house and our finances." "We'll take care of it," he assured me. "But I need you to be prepared. Linda might not take this well, and things could get messy." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. She already threatened to make it difficult. I just want it to be over. "Well, do our best to expedite the process," Mr. Davis said. "But be prepared for anything. She might try to manipulate the situation or drag it out." As I left the lawyer's office, I felt a heavy burden on my shoulders. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with potential pitfalls and emotional landmines. But I knew I had to stay strong, not just for myself, but for the future I hoped to build once this nightmare was over. When I returned home, Linda was waiting for me, her demeanor icy and hostile. "So, did you get everything sorted with your lawyer?" she sneered. "Yes," I replied calmly. "We're moving forward with the divorce." "You're making a huge mistake, Jake," she hissed. "But if this is what you want, then fine. Just don't expect me to roll over and let you take everything." "I'm not trying to take everything," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I just want what's fair." "Fair?" she laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You don't know the meaning of the word. That night, I locked myself in the guest room, trying to block out the sound of Linda's angry muttering. I knew this was only the beginning of a long and painful process, but I was determined to see it through. The woman I had loved and trusted was gone, replaced by someone I could no longer recognize. And as much as it hurt, I knew I had to let go and move forward, no matter how difficult the journey might be. Linda's hostility only grew in the weeks that followed. She alternated between attempts to win me back with false affection and vicious outbursts aimed at undermining my resolve. It was a constant emotional roller coaster, and I knew I had to find a way to protect myself from her manipulations. The final straw came one night when she threw a glass at me during an argument, shattering it against the wall. That's when I decided it was time to take control of the situation in a way that would ensure she understood the gravity of her actions. First, I started documenting everything. Every interaction, every argument, every instance of her erratic behavior. I kept meticulous records, knowing that this evidence would be crucial if things went south in court. I also installed cameras around the house, discreetly hidden, to capture any future incidents. I was determined to build an airtight case against her, one that would leave no room for her lies and deceit. Next, I turned my attention to Chris. I knew where he worked, and it didn't take long to find out more about his personal life. He was married, with 2 young children, a fact that made my blood boil even more. He had no right to invade my marriage while living a double life. It was time for him to face the consequences of his actions. One evening, while Linda was out, I drove to Chris' house. It was a modest home, not unlike our own, nestled in a quiet neighborhood. I waited in my car until I saw his wife and children leave, probably for some evening activity. When I was sure Chris was alone, I walked up to the door and knocked. He opened the door, looking surprised and wary. "Jake, what are you doing here? We need to talk," I said, my voice cold and steady. "About Linda." Chris' face paled. He stepped back, allowing me to enter. We stood in his living room, the tension thick in the air. "You have no right to be here," he began, but I cut him off. "Save it, Chris. I know everything, and I'm sure your wife would love to know what you've been up to." He tried to play it cool, but I could see the fear in his eyes. "You wouldn't I?" I pulled out my phone and showed him the messages, the photos, the undeniable evidence of his affair with Linda. "This is just a taste of what I have. Imagine what your wife would think if she saw this." Chris' composure crumbled. "What do you want?" "I want you to end it. Completely. No contact, no messages, nothing. And I want you to tell your wife everything." He looked horrified. "I can't do that. It would destroy my family." "Funny, that's exactly what you were doing to mine," I snapped. "You have until the end of the week. If you don't, I'll send everything to her myself. And trust me, I'll make sure everyone at your workplace knows what kind of man you are." I turned and left, feeling a grim satisfaction. It wasn't the end of my plan, but it was a start. Chris had to understand that his actions had consequences, and I was determined to see this through. Back home, I focused on protecting myself legally. I met with my lawyer regularly, ensuring every step I took was documented and within the bounds of the law. The cameras I installed around the house captured Linda's increasingly volatile behavior, further strengthening my case. I knew the divorce proceedings would be brutal, but I was prepared. Then I turned my attention to Linda's social circle. She had a close-knit group of friends, many of whom were unaware of her affair. I began subtly spreading the truth, ensuring that her reputation took a hit. It was a small, petty revenge, but it felt good to see her squirm as her friends started to distance themselves. The real blow came when I exposed her to her family. Linda had always prided herself on being the perfect daughter and sister. I gathered the evidence and sent it to her parents and siblings, along with a letter explaining everything. The fallout was immediate and intense. Her family was devastated and furious, and Linda found herself ostracized by the people she had always relied on for support. One evening, Linda confronted me, her face twisted with rage. "You think you can just ruin my life and get away with it?" "You ruined your own life, Linda," I replied calmly. "I'm just making sure you face the consequences." Her eyes blazed with hatred. "You haven't won, Jake. I'll fight you every step of the way." "Do what you need to do," I said, my voice steady. "But remember, Every action you take has consequences, and I've documented everything. The divorce proceedings were a grueling process, but my preparation paid off. The evidence I had gathered, her affair with Chris, her volatile behavior, and the testimonies from her estranged friends and family, painted a damning picture. The court awarded me the house and a significant portion of our assets. Linda's attempts to fight back were futile, and she found herself with little to show for her deceit and betrayal. As the dust settled, I felt a sense of closure. I had taken control of the situation and ensured that Linda faced the repercussions of her actions. It wasn't the life I had envisioned, but it was a new beginning. I was free from the lies and deceit, ready to rebuild my life on my terms. Linda moved out of the house shortly after the court ruling. The once cozy home felt emptier, but it was also a place of new beginnings. I started making changes, both big and small, to make the house truly my own. It was a slow process, but with each change, I felt a little more at peace. The town of Brooksville, with its quiet streets and familiar faces, remained a constant in my life. People knew about the divorce, of course. Rumors spread quickly in a small town. But I held my head high, knowing that I had done everything in my power to protect myself and move forward. In the months that followed, I focused on myself. I reconnected with old friends, took up hobbies I had neglected, and started to explore new interests. The pain of Linda's betrayal still lingered, but it no longer defined me. I was moving on, step by step, rebuilding my life from the ground up. Revenge had been a necessary part of my journey, but now it was time to leave it behind. It was time to focus on healing, on finding happiness, and on building a future free from the shadows of the past. Months had passed since Linda moved out. The legal battles were behind us, and the house had begun to feel like my own sanctuary again. Despite the turbulence, I was finding a new rhythm, a sense of peace in my solitude. But there was one last thing I needed to do: have a final conversation with Linda. We had avoided each other since the court's decision, communicating only through lawyers and terse text messages. It was time for closure, a chance to say what needed to be said, and finally put this chapter behind me. I called Linda and asked her to meet me at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. She agreed, and I could hear the hesitation in her voice. The day of our meeting was overcast, fitting the somber mood I felt. I arrived early, choosing a table in a secluded corner where we could talk without interruption. I watched the door, my mind a swirl of emotions, wondering how this final encounter would play out. Linda arrived on time, looking tired and worn. She hesitated at the entrance before spotting me and making her way over. She sat down across from me, her eyes avoiding mine. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us. "Thank you for meeting me," I began, breaking the silence. Linda nodded, still not looking at me. "I didn't think we'd ever do this," she said quietly. "There's a lot we need to talk about," I replied. "A lot that needs to be said." She finally met my gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of regret and defiance. "I know I hurt you, Jake. I know I messed up." "You did," I agreed, my voice calm but firm. "But it's more than that, Linda. You betrayed me. You lied to me, to us, for years." She looked down, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of the table. "I know. I don't have any excuses." "I didn't ask you here for excuses," I said, leaning forward. "I asked you here because I need closure. I need to understand why." Linda took a deep breath, her shoulders sagging. "I don't know if I can give you a satisfying answer, Jake. I was lonely. I felt neglected. Chris was there, and I made a terrible choice. It's not your fault, and it's not something you deserved." "It wasn't just about you, Linda," I said, my voice tinged with sadness. "It was about us, about everything we built together. Did none of that matter to you?" "It did matter," she insisted, tears welling up in her eyes. "It mattered more than anything. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that. I was selfish and stupid." I watched her, feeling a pang of sadness. "I loved you, Linda. I trusted you. And you destroyed that trust." "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I know that's not enough, but I am." "Sorry doesn't change what happened," I said, my tone softening. "But maybe it can help us both move on." We sat in silence for a moment, the noise of the cafe fading into the background. I realized that this conversation wasn't just for me. It was for Linda, too. She needed to hear my pain, to understand the depth of her betrayal. "Do you regret it?" I asked, breaking the silence. "Every day," she replied without hesitation. "I wish I could go back and change everything. But I can't." I nodded, accepting her words. "I don't know what the future holds for either of us, but I hope you find what you're looking for. I hope you find a way to be happy." She looked at me, a small, sad smile on her lips. "I hope you do too, Jake. You deserve it." With that, our conversation came to a close. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic reconciliations, just two people acknowledging the end of a significant chapter in their lives. We stood up, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace. "Goodbye, Linda," I said, offering her a final, sincere look. "Goodbye, Jake," she replied, her voice trembling. I watched her leave the cafe, feeling a mix of relief and melancholy. The woman I had once loved was now a part of my past, and it was time to look forward to the future. The final conversation had given me the closure I needed, a chance to voice my pain and hear her regret. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Returning home that evening, I felt lighter. The house seemed brighter, the weight of the past lifting from my shoulders. I stood in the living room, looking around at the space that had seen so much turmoil and heartache. It was time to fill it with new memories, new beginnings. I called my friend Paul and made plans to go out that weekend. It was time to rejoin the world, to embrace the opportunities that lay ahead. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to shape. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. The next day, I went for a long walk in the park, letting the cool breeze clear my mind. I thought about the journey I had been on, the pain and the growth. I had learned so much about myself, about resilience, and about the importance of self-worth. Linda's betrayal had been a catalyst for change, pushing me to rediscover who I was and what I wanted from life. I sat on a bench, watching the world go by, and felt a sense of gratitude. I had survived the storm and come out stronger. The future was bright, and I was ready to embrace it. The day of the trial finally arrived, marking the culmination of months of preparation, emotional upheaval, and relentless pursuit of justice. I walked into the courtroom, feeling a mix of anxiety and determination. The courtroom was austere, with its polished wooden benches and the solemnity of the judge's bench commanding attention. My lawyer, Mr. Davis, stood by my side, his presence a steadying influence. Linda arrived shortly after, accompanied by her lawyer. She looked worn, her defiance now tempered by a weary acceptance of the inevitable. We exchanged a brief glance, but there were no words between us. The trial was not about rekindling old emotions, but about finalizing the end of a chapter in our lives. The proceedings began with the judge outlining the purpose of the trial, to determine the division of assets and, most importantly, to resolve the issue of alimony. My lawyer presented the meticulously gathered evidence, painting a clear picture of Linda's infidelity and erratic behavior. The evidence included the messages and photos from Chris, testimonies from friends and family, and the footage from the cameras I had installed in the house. Linda's lawyer attempted to counter, arguing that my actions in gathering evidence were invasive and that Linda's behavior was a result of feeling neglected. However, the evidence was overwhelming, and the judge seemed unimpressed by their attempts to shift blame. When it was Linda's turn to speak, she stood and addressed the judge, her voice trembling. "Your Honor, I know I made mistakes. I was lonely, and I made poor decisions. But I believe I deserve a chance to rebuild my life. I'm not asking for everything, just enough to start over." Her words were filled with regret, but I remained stoic. This trial was not about sympathy. It was about justice. I had spent months documenting everything, ensuring that my case was airtight. Mr. Davis presented our closing arguments, emphasizing the impact of Linda's actions on our marriage and the necessity of a fair settlement that reflected the true circumstances. He argued that Linda's request for substantial alimony was unreasonable, given her role in the dissolution of our marriage. The judge deliberated for what felt like an eternity. Finally, he addressed the courtroom, his voice measured and authoritative. "After reviewing the evidence and considering the arguments from both sides, it is clear that the actions of Mrs. Thompson played a significant role in the breakdown of this marriage. Therefore, the request for alimony is denied." The division of assets will proceed as outlined, with Mr. Thompson retaining the marital home and a fair portion of the shared assets. A wave of relief washed over me. The judge's decision felt like a validation of everything I had endured. Linda looked devastated, but I knew this outcome was just. She had to face the consequences of her actions. As the trial concluded, I felt a sense of closure. The legal battle was over, and I could finally move forward with my life. Outside the courtroom, I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past lift from my shoulders. "Thank you, Mr. Davis," I said, shaking my lawyer's hand. "I couldn't have done this without you." "You did well, Jake," he replied, offering a reassuring smile. "Now it's time to focus on the future." I watched as Linda walked away, her head bowed. There was a part of me that still felt a twinge of sadness for what we had lost, but it was overshadowed by a sense of relief and newfound freedom. The trial had been a battle, but it was also a turning point. It marked the end of a painful chapter and the beginning of a new one. I was no longer shackled by the past, and the future stretched out before me, filled with possibilities. In the weeks following the trial, I focused on rebuilding my life. I made changes to the house, transforming it into a space that reflected my new beginning. I reconnected with old friends and embraced new hobbies. Every day was a step towards healing, towards rediscovering who I was outside of the shadow of my marriage. One afternoon, I received a message from Paul, inviting me to join him and some friends for a weekend hiking trip. It was an opportunity to reconnect with nature, to clear my mind and embrace the freedom that came with my new life. I agreed, eager for the chance to step away from everything and find a sense of peace in the wilderness. The trip was everything I needed. Surrounded by the beauty of the mountains and the camaraderie of friends, I felt a sense of renewal. We hiked during the day, pushing ourselves physically, and spent the evenings around a campfire, sharing stories and laughter. It was a reminder of the simple joys in life, the things that truly mattered. On the last day of the trip, as we reached the summit of a particularly challenging trail, I stood at the top, looking out over the vast expanse of nature. The view was breathtaking, a testament to the journey I had been on. I took a deep breath, feeling the crisp mountain air fill my lungs, and felt a profound sense of peace. The trial, the betrayal, and the pain were now part of my past. They had shaped me, but they did not define me. I was ready to embrace the future, to build a life that was true to who I was and what I wanted. As I descended the mountain, I felt lighter, more grounded. The path ahead was still uncertain, but I was ready for whatever came next. The trial had been the final hurdle, and now it was time to move forward, to live my life on my own terms. Returning home, I felt a sense of optimism. The future was bright, and I was ready to embrace it. I knew there would still be challenges, but I also knew that I had the strength and resilience to face them. The journey was far from over, but I was no longer afraid. I was ready to take on the world and build a life filled with joy, love, and new beginnings. The months following the trial were transformative. The house, once a reminder of betrayal, became a symbol of renewal. I painted the walls, replaced the furniture, and filled the space with pieces that reflected my newfound sense of self. It was therapeutic, each change a step towards reclaiming my life and identity. I reconnected with old friends, attended social events, and even joined a local hiking club. The sense of community and the support from friends old and new helped me heal. Every hike, every conversation, was a reminder that life goes on, and happiness can be found in the most unexpected places. One evening, as I sat on the porch, sipping a cup of coffee, I reflected on the journey I had been through. The pain of Linda's betrayal had been immense, but it had also been a catalyst for growth. I had discovered a strength within myself that I never knew existed. I had learned the importance of self-worth and the power of resilience. My thoughts were interrupted by a text message from Paul. He had become a steadfast friend throughout the ordeal, always there with a listening ear and a word of encouragement. "Hey Jake, a few of us are going to the new brewery downtown this weekend. You in?" the message read. Smiling, I replied, "Count me in. Looking forward to it." The weekend arrived, and I found myself at the bustling brewery, surrounded by friends. The atmosphere was lively, filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses. It was a stark contrast to the loneliness I had felt months ago. I was part of something again, a community that valued and supported me. As the evening progressed, I struck up a conversation with a woman named Sarah. She was smart, funny, and shared my love for hiking and the outdoors. We talked for hours, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of genuine connection. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and I spent more time together. We hiked, went to local events, and shared countless conversations. She was patient, understanding, and respected the pace at which I wanted to move. There was no rush, no pressure, just a mutual enjoyment of each other's company. One sunny afternoon, we decided to take a hike up to a scenic overlook. The trail was challenging but rewarding, and as we reached the top, the view took my breath away. The vast expanse of rolling hills and the distant horizon felt like a metaphor for my life, full of possibilities, waiting to be explored. We sat on a rock, catching our breath and enjoying the tranquility of the moment. Sarah turned to me, her eyes reflecting the sunlight. "You've come a long way, Jake. I'm glad to be part of this journey with you." I smiled, feeling a warmth that had been absent for so long. "I couldn't have done it without the support of friends like you, Sarah. Thank you for being here." She reached out and took my hand, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. "Here's to new beginnings," she said softly. "To new beginnings," I echoed, feeling a sense of hope and excitement for the future. As we made our way back down the trail, I realized that the journey of healing and self-discovery was ongoing. There would be challenges ahead, but I was no longer afraid. I had faced the worst and emerged stronger, ready to embrace whatever life had in store. Back at home, I continued to build a life that was true to myself. I pursued new hobbies, traveled to places I had always wanted to visit, and deepened my relationships with those who mattered most. The house was no longer just a place to live. It was a home, filled with memories and the promise of a bright future. One evening, as I stood in the garden, admiring the sunset, I felt a profound sense of peace. The pain of the past had faded, replaced by a resilient spirit and a heart open to new experiences. I had learned that happiness is not found in the absence of challenges, but in the strength to overcome them. Sarah and I continued to grow closer, our bond deepening with each passing day. She became a source of joy and companionship, a reminder that love could be rediscovered, even after the darkest of times. The future was bright, filled with endless possibilities. I had learned to trust myself, to value my own happiness, and to embrace the journey of life with an open heart. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to face it with courage and hope. As I looked out at the horizon, I felt a sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought me here. The trials and tribulations had shaped me, but they did not define me. I was free, ready to write the next chapter of my life, a chapter filled with love, laughter, and the promise of new beginnings. And so I stepped forward, embracing the unknown with a heart full of hope and a spirit ready to soar. The past was behind me, and the future awaited. It was time to live, to love, and to discover the boundless possibilities that lay ahead.